Disclaimer. This video contains crime-related content and is not suitable for children. Viewer discretion is advised. Today's case took place in France on February 19th, in a town known as Saint-Thomas-de-Cognac. The road was quiet, wrapped in the stillness of a late-night hour, when Jean-Yves and his cousin began their drive home from a lively party. The hum of the engine was the only sound, until a sudden piercing light from the opposite direction seared their eyes. At first, they thought nothing of it. Just another driver with the high beams on, like so many do at night, pretending it somehow makes the road safer. But as the glare grew nearer, the truth emerged from the darkness. A wrecked Mercedes lay abandoned on the roadside, its twisted frame engulfed in roaring flames that clawed at the sky. A chill ran through them. This wasn't just a broken-down car, it was the aftermath of a violent crash. Questions tumbled in their minds. Was the driver still inside? Was there someone else with him? Had they escaped to call for help, or were they trapped, swallowed by the inferno? The heat was unbearable, the fire a living wall that kept them at bay. They couldn't get close enough to see inside, let alone pull anyone out. There was only one choice left: keep their distance and call the National Guard. The officers would summon the fire brigade, racing against the flames that devoured what was left of the car. And so, under the cold gaze of the moon, the two young men stood helpless, watching the blaze rage on. Its light flickering across their faces, a silent witness to the fragility of life on an empty night road. Moments later, the National Guard arrived, followed closely by the firefighters, who wasted no time unleashing torrents of water on the blaze. Yet even as the flames hissed and spat under the assault, a single question pressed in on everyone present. What could have made the car erupt with such ferocity? It didn't take long for the firefighters to notice something unsettling. The charred Mercedes bore no scars of impact, no dents, no twisted metal, no sign it had veered off the road. Both the front and rear remained perfectly aligned, untouched by any collision, save for the fact that fire had devoured it entirely. The asphalt beneath showed no skid marks, no desperate attempt at braking. And so, as the last embers winked out and the night reclaimed its silence, one mystery lingered in the smoky air, unseen, unanswered, and heavy as a shadow. If there had been no crash, then what had truly happened? What puzzled the firefighters and the National Guard even more was the strong smell of gasoline, what they often called kalthu, despite the fact that the burned Mercedes was a diesel vehicle. So where had the smell of gasoline come from? The only plausible explanation was that the car had been deliberately set on fire. Someone had poured gasoline over it, lit the flames, and vanished without a trace. If that wasn't enough, the firefighters then made another discovery: a large black bag on the front passenger seat, right next to where the driver would have been. The fire had already eaten away a good part of it, and because the firefighting process had produced thick clouds of smoke, no one had noticed the bag earlier, or even considered the possibility that it might contain a body. In the end, that was the dreadful sight awaiting the firefighters. A body reduced to little more than ash and bone, its features erased by the flames. The prevailing suspicion was chilling. Whoever owned the Mercedes had brought the corpse along, intent on erasing both body and car in one merciless blaze, before vanishing into the night. For the National Guard officers, there was only one possible conclusion: murder. Yet the crime was wrapped in shadows, its circumstances elusive, its motives hidden. Their first step was clear: uncover the identity of the Mercedes owner. They traced the license plate through the central registry, and the reply came swiftly. The vehicle belonged to a woman named Françoise Brissot de Maillet. She lived only a short distance from the scorched patch of road where the car had been found, in the quiet district of Saint-Thomas-de-Cognac. The discovery raised more questions than it answered. Who was Françoise Brissot de Maillet? And what secret bound her name to the charred remains inside that Mercedes? The National Guard officers went straight to Françoise's house and knocked on the door. No one answered. They had imagined that by now they would find someone inside, someone who could shed light on what had happened that night, someone who could explain the car and its mysterious owner. But the silence lingered, and with every passing moment, their conviction grew stronger. The charred body in the blackened trunk might well be Françoise Brissot herself. The very next morning, the guard station received an unexpected call. A man reported his car stolen. His name was Michel Poteau. From that moment, the investigation took a sharp turn. How could this man claim the Mercedes was his, while the registration papers bore Françoise's name? He even gave them the license plate number, and it matched exactly. The officers summoned Michel to the station. They needed his testimony. How could the car belong to him if it wasn't registered in his name? And above all, when had it been stolen? Michel Brat eventually showed up at the station. He explained that his car had gone missing the night before, on the 19th of 1994. When he returned home, it simply wasn't there. The officers pressed him. Did he suspect anyone? Was there someone who might have taken it? After a pause, he admitted he suspected Françoise Brissot. That answer left the investigators baffled. How could Françoise be a suspect when the Mercedes was registered in her name? The contradiction was glaring. Michel then revealed the missing piece. Françoise was his ex-wife. They had separated years ago, but the car, though legally hers, had remained in his possession ever since. Each had gone their own way, yet the Mercedes stayed with him. This was the version of events Michel gave, and the National Guard officers carefully noted every word, aware that the mystery had just deepened. When the officers finally revealed to Michel that the Mercedes had been discovered in flames on a road not far from his home, with a body inside, his world seemed to collapse. The remains had already been sent to the forensic laboratory to determine whether they belonged to Françoise Brissot. At that moment, Michel broke down, his head buried in his hands, his body shaking with sobs. The guard stood by in silence, waiting for him to regain control, to steady his breath, to return to himself. When he was calm enough to speak, they urged him to continue. Michel began to recount his story with Françoise. She was his ex-wife, yes, but the truth was more complicated. The divorce had not severed the bond between them. There was still a current of emotion, a spark that refused to die out. From time to time, they found themselves drawn back together, as if the past still held them captive. He spoke of the beginning, back in 1970, when they first met, when everything was new and charged with possibility. The officers listened closely, realizing that this was no ordinary case. To uncover the truth behind the burned Mercedes and the body inside, they would first have to untangle the long, fraught history of Michel and Françoise. They first met in 1970 in Brussels. At the time, Michel was serving as a firefighter, while Françoise worked as an administrative secretary at the European Union. Their life together was comfortable, and above all, they were deeply in love. Yet that love lasted no more than 14 years. Quarrels grew heavier with time, and eventually the marriage ended in divorce. But their story did not end there. Toward the late 1980s, Françoise suffered a stroke that left her paralyzed, confined to a wheelchair. She could no longer move on her own and was forced into early retirement. From then on, she needed someone to care for her. And despite the separation, it was Michel who stepped back into her life. He became her caretaker, feeding her, dressing her, cleaning the house, taking her to doctors and hospitals. He did everything, as though she were a loved one with special needs, refusing to abandon her even after their marriage had long dissolved. Michel claimed that Françoise came to his house knowing full well he wasn't there. She had a copy of the Mercedes key, and according to him, she took the car and vanished. But that's where the mystery deepens. How did Françoise even get inside the house? There were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no tampered electricity, and certainly no trace of any drug use or sedative that could explain her presence. The police didn't buy Michel's story. The way he told it felt rehearsed, too polished. He had an answer for everything, and what really threw them off was how he volunteered information they hadn't even asked for, like how the car supposedly caught fire. He laid out the whole scenario, step by step, as if he were narrating a movie scene. First, he insisted the car veering off the road was completely normal. No other possibility, he said. Then came the detail about the smell of gasoline, which firefighters and investigators confirmed. Michel claimed it came from the open fuel filter on the passenger seat, left that way, he said, after he cleaned it. Michel swore that the fuel spill happened precisely when Françoise took the car, and that she didn't even notice it. The investigators humored him, saying, "All right, let's assume that's true, but explain to us, how did the fire start?" Michel had an answer ready. He claimed it was the lighter. You know, the kind people press down and forget about. According to him, Françoise lit a cigarette, pushed the car lighter in, and left it. It popped out on its own, sparked, and with the fuel fumes lingering in the cabin, the whole thing went up in flames. His story had every detail lined up. Even the state of Françoise's body, intoxicated, burned, found in the driver's seat, was accounted for. But then came the question, if she was driving, who was sitting next to her? Michel fell silent. No answer. The officers had been patient, letting him talk, giving him space. But that silence, it said more than all his words. That's when they made their decision, to place him in custody on suspicion of premeditated murder. As far as they were concerned, Michel had killed Françoise and torched the car to erase the evidence.
On ne comprend pas très bien les explications de M. Prost à ce moment-là. On trouve un petit peu surprenant. Pourquoi a-t-elle repris son véhicule alors qu'il était là depuis un long moment? Et puis en fait, pourquoi le reprendre de nuit alors qu'elle peut venir lui demander puisque c'est son véhicule et que la carte grise est à son nom?
The investigators were stunned to discover that Michel Braut had prepared everything in advance to dodge the accusation. He handed the investigators a stack of receipts from kiosks, convenience stores and supermarkets to prove that on the afternoon and evening of February 19th, he couldn't possibly have had time to kill Françoise and burn the car. What shocked them even more was how meticulously he had kept every single ticket, as if he had calculated everything down to the last detail. It was a very strange behavior, and that's what made them re-examine minute by minute, second by second, all the places Michel had been at the time of the crime. They found that there was a time gap during which he could have done whatever he wanted. So they asked him, "Where were you between 9 p.m. and 2 a.m.? He replied, "I was at the hangar in Bordeaux, waiting for Françoise." They pressed him. "Why didn't you tell us that from the beginning? You said she came by train that day. How did you know that?" He answered, "I wasn't hiding anything. I went to pick her up myself. I left the house at 9, headed to the station and waited for her, but she never showed up." He said he kept going back and forth to the station, hoping to find her, but nothing happened. According to his story, Michel waited for Françoise for nearly 5 hours. But that long wait didn't convince the investigators at all, especially since the car was set on fire between 2 and 2:30 a.m. What they realized was that Michel had more than enough time to do far more than just wait. He could have left home, gone to Bordeaux station, committed the murder, burned the body, and returned, without raising suspicion. Suddenly, his alibi started to crumble. It no longer sounded like a man waiting for his wife. It sounded like a man covering up a crime, a murder disguised as a tragic accident. While awaiting confirmation from the forensic team that the charred body found in the Mercedes was indeed Françoise Bresseau, Michel was officially charged with premeditated murder and sent to prison pending further investigation. And now came the real question. Why would Michel kill Françoise? What did he stand to gain? At this stage, after Michel had settled into his cell, the forensic doctor completed his report. It wasn't easy. Multiple tests had to be run. The body showed no signs of physical trauma, but traces of phenobarbital, a powerful sedative, were found in the stomach and kidneys. In high doses, it knocks a person out in seconds. But here's the twist. The victim didn't die from the drug. She died from smoke inhalation. She was alive when the fire started. That meant she was breathing while the car was burning, sedated, but conscious enough to inhale the smoke. And then came the shock. The forensic report confirmed that the victim wasn't Françoise Bresseau at all. It was an unknown woman. The investigators were stunned. How did the doctor know? Simple. The body had a uterus and ovaries. But Françoise, according to Michel and her medical records, had undergone a hysterectomy, a complete removal of the uterus to prevent cancer. So who was this woman with intact reproductive organs? And more importantly, where was Françoise Bresseau? From this moment on, the case took a dramatic 180-degree turn, and the story was just beginning.
Donc le cadavre a l'utérus, alors que Madame Françoise Brissot-Desmaillet n'en a plus.
La personne a été opérée d'une hystérectomie, c'est-à-dire qu'on lui a sorti l'utérus et on lui a sorti les ovaires. Donc, ça ne peut pas correspondre.
La conclusion, c'est que le corps qui a été autopsié ne peut pas être Françoise Brissot-Desmaillet.
As the investigation progressed, the officers began searching for any clue that could reveal Françoise's whereabouts. They questioned her relatives and acquaintances and soon discovered that she had been missing for over 4 months. Everyone they spoke to confirmed the same thing. The last time they saw her was back in October 1993. When the investigators revisited that time period, they found that Françoise's last known appearance was at a medical appointment. She was also scheduled to see another doctor the following day, but she never showed up. From that moment on, Françoise vanished. A few days later, her father and sister claimed they received postcards from her, saying she had traveled to an African country. But when the officers examined the cards, they noticed something strange. Although the images showed African landscapes, the stamps and postmarks were all from France. The story didn't add up. Even more puzzling was the signature, X Françoise, a cryptic mark, almost like someone was hinting, indirectly, that she was dead. So if Françoise didn't send those postcards, who did? To dig deeper, the officers traced the postmarks to the city of Toulon. They discovered that Françoise had an apartment there. Naturally, they went to investigate, but the place was locked and empty. They canvassed the entire neighborhood, asking residents if anyone had seen her. Not a single person had. No one had seen Françoise since October 1993. The only person who claimed to have seen her regularly up until February 19th was Michel Brot, her husband. That's why the investigation shifted entirely toward him. They searched his house in Cognac, and there they found Françoise's handbag. What was it doing in his home? Inside the bag were her prescription glasses. Françoise had poor eyesight. She couldn't drive without them. So if she had truly left the country, how did she travel without her glasses, without her ID? That's when the real questions began.
Quand on fait l'emploi du temps de Madame Brissot-Desmaillet, la seule trace de son passage qu'on retrouve, c'est à Saint-Thomas-de-Cognac, en octobre, donc plusieurs mois avant la disparition. Et là, on constate qu'elle se rend bien à un rendez-vous chez un médecin, son médecin traitant. Par contre, elle a un rendez-vous le lendemain avec un podologue, et là, elle ne s'y rend plus. Et à partir de là, plus aucune nouvelle, jamais, de Madame Brissot-Desmaillet-Françoise.
Around that time, the media jumped into the case. For weeks, it dominated the front pages of national newspapers. The public attention helped push the investigation forward. It created a turning point. Then came a tip from a man in the town of Royan. He contacted the police and reported that his mother, Blanche Vichier, 68 years old, had been missing for some time. He added a crucial detail. Blanche was an acquaintance of Michel Brot. Naturally, the police summoned him for questioning. He confirmed that his mother disappeared on February 19, 1994, the same day the Mercedes was set on fire. According to him, Blanche had an appointment with Michel that day. He was supposed to come to her house with a drill to help her hang a decorative mask on the living room wall, a souvenir she had brought back from Italy. That was enough for the police to act. They obtained a warrant from the public prosecutor and headed to Blanche's apartment in Royan. What they found was disturbing. The place was in chaos. Her slippers were lying by the door, and 2 coffee cups were left unwashed in the sink. Blanche was known for being obsessively tidy. She never left anything dirty behind. That alone raised suspicions. But the real confirmation came when they found a hole drilled into the wall, just as her son had described. The drill marks were still fresh, even in the living room. The investigators went straight to the prison to confront Michel. He claimed Blanche had invited him over for dinner. But phone records told a different story. Michel was the one who called her, not the other way around. He was lying. As the investigation intensified, the police began digging into Michel Brot's past. What they found was alarming. Michel was born in Belgium and spent his youth there. Just after turning 19, Tragedy struck his family. His younger brother committed suicide, and a year later, his mother died of cancer. Michel worked briefly as a firefighter in Brussels, but was dismissed after it was discovered he had been setting fires himself. His first known crime was the murder of a retired man. He strangled him with a rope after being caught stealing from the victim's home. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison, but served only 5. By now, it was clear Michel Braut had a long and disturbing criminal history. And the question that haunted investigators was this: if the woman burned in the Mercedes wasn't Françoise, could it have been Blanche? They needed to find out. They re-examined the remains and the ashes found inside the burned car. What solved the mystery was a single tooth, silver-plated, just like Blanche's. And by sheer coincidence, her medical records confirmed she had a dental implant in the exact same spot, with identical specifications. As the investigation unfolded, the police began asking deeper questions. If Françoise had truly been murdered, why would Michel kill 2 women? What was his motive? And why lie, making them believe the body in the Mercedes was his ex-wife? But to get any confession out of him, they needed to find Françoise's body. The most likely scenario? She was buried somewhere on Michel's property. It was the only place he could fully control. The police deployed every available resource, including advanced technology, a helicopter equipped with ground-scanning sensors that could detect recent digging and refilling. While the aerial search was underway, investigators dug into Michel's activities around October 1993. They discovered he had hired a laborer to seal off some drainage pipes. That worker confirmed that just before finishing the job, Michel abruptly told him to stop, paid him, and sent him away, almost as if there was a specific area he didn't want anyone near. That was enough. The police pulled Michel out of prison and brought him to the site to witness the excavation. The digging began. At one point, a guard overheard Michel muttering to himself, "Damn, I'm screwed." He hadn't realized he'd spoken out loud. Moments later, he tried to flee, but the officers caught him immediately. They kept digging, and then they found her, Françoise's body. She was found in her nightgown, wrapped in a sheet with a rope tied tightly around her neck. It was the exact same method Michel had used years earlier to kill a retired man in Belgium. Same killer, same modus operandi. At this point in the investigation, the police concluded that the motive behind Françoise's murder was money. Michel had no job, no income, no assets. Françoise, on the other hand, had a comfortable pension and, according to those close to her, had hidden away a considerable amount of cash. It all started to make sense. Michel killed her simply to get his hands on the money, especially considering that Françoise had been supporting him financially. She had even given him power of attorney over her bank accounts and properties. But according to the information the police uncovered, Michel began planning the murder the moment Françoise decided to revoke the power of attorney and take back control of her finances. That's when he killed her and forged her signature to keep access to her accounts. But if Françoise's murder had a clear motive, what about Blanche? What had she done to deserve such a fate? The answer was chillingly simple. Nothing. She was just a convenient body. Michel needed a corpse to burn in the Mercedes so everyone would believe it was Françoise. And let's not forget the elaborate tricks he used to explain Françoise's disappearance, like the fake postcards claiming she had traveled to Africa. But the plan didn't work. Her family kept pressuring the police to find answers. That's when Michel contacted Blanche, a woman he knew from before. She lived alone, had no close relatives and no one watching over her. He offered to come by and help her hang a decorative mask. She welcomed him warmly, made him coffee, and while her guard was down, he slipped phenobarbital into her drink. She drank the coffee. Moments later, she fell silent, slipping into a deep, drug-induced sleep. That night, Michel acted quickly. Under the cover of darkness, he wrapped her body in a sheet, stuffed it into a large bag, and drove off in the Mercedes. Once he was outside the city of Cognac, he set the car on fire. He had already prepared the fuel and accelerants. He waited until he was sure the body had burned completely, then vanished. His choice of victim was no coincidence. Blanche was roughly the same size and age as Françoise. It was the perfect illusion. A woman burned in a car accident, presumed to be Françoise. And poor Blanche. No one would have ever known what happened to her if fate hadn't intervened and her son hadn't contacted the police. At the end of the investigation, Michel refused to confess to anything. Instead, he tried another trick. He sent letters to some of his relatives, claiming they were written by the Belgian intelligence services. In them, he alleged that Françoise and Blanche had been killed for political reasons. No one believed him. Then, on June 2, 1995, Michel attempted to escape from prison with 2 other inmates. They had explosives and weapons, but the plan failed. Finally, on September 17, 1996, Michel Braut stood trial. He was sentenced to life in prison. To this day, he refuses to admit guilt. He still insists the murders were the work of Belgian intelligence.
Si on met à nu des vies, on explique des choses, on explique des comportements. Or là, par son mutisme, il a privé la cour d'assises d'humanité, il a privé la cour d'assises d'explication, et donc il s'est montré sous le plus mauvais jour qu'on pouvait imaginer.
And with that, we say goodbye until the next episode. If you found this case as gripping as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next chapter. Because trust me, the story isn't over yet. Until next time, stay curious, stay sharp, and keep digging.